I wonder how many of you, after hearing this parable, would trust Jesus with the payroll at your office. Maybe if you're an employee, you'd welcome his policy of paying those who only work an hour the same as those who have worked all day. However, if you're the employer, the one with the responsibility for the solvency of your enterprise, Jesus would probably not be your first pick to handle payroll or HR. He violates the basic principle of the quality of exchange, and you simply cannot run a business that way. If you translate this into an allegory about the generosity of God, then it kind of works, but it still doesn't seem fair. Those who bear the heat and work of a full day get paid the same as those who show up at the last hour. I don't think the workers' morale would be very high in a kingdom that operates this way. But we look past the unjustness of this parable and we try to be pious because we're in church. And we call it grace. Oh, it's God's grace, we say. You can't earn it. It's just overwhelming. Don't brand me a heretic yet. Listen to the rest. So, this summer I met a priest from Charleston, South Carolina, when I was in my doctorate program in Sewanee. Charlestonians, as you know, really value their southernness. Citizenship in their city comes complete with its own dress code. For men, seersucker in the summertime, blazer and khakis in the winter, and that is just the casual spectrum of the dress code. Anyway, when my friend first arrived in Charleston, he was presented with a very generous gift certificate to one of the finer men's stores in town. The person giving the gift certificate was the owner of the store and also a parishioner in my friend's parish. My friend was overwhelmed by the generosity of this parishioner, so overwhelmed, in fact, that he began to think of the many ways he could pay the guy back. He went through mental gymnastics of how to receive the gift, but also return the generosity. He came up with a solution. He decided he would go to the men's store, carefully calculate all his purchases so that he was sure to exceed the gift certificate by $400 or $500. And that way he would, in a small way anyway, contribute to the till that day. So he went. He started picking out clothes right and left. Probably in that store not very many to get over the $400 or $500, but he gets things he knows he'll need as well as a well-dressed Charleston gentleman, and he gets other things that maybe he wouldn't ordinarily buy for himself. He pulls out his phone, brings up the calculator app, and starts calculating the costs. And he's done it. He's exceeded the gift certificate and now is ready to check out. The owner who presented the certificate to him is there, and he starts ringing up the purchases. My friend and the owner exchange polite conversation while the total is tallied, and then the owner announces, "It appears that you've spent only half of your gift certificate this trip." My friend is shocked. He looks around for sale signs. He starts racking his brain to see how he could have made such a miscalculation. He can't for his life figure out how all that he had picked out added up to only half of the gift certificate. Well, now he's embarrassed. His plan to repay the generosity failed, and he's unsure what to do. The owner of the store says, "Here are your purchases, and here's your gift certificate back for you to use another day." Now he was really embarrassed. He goes home and starts plotting with his wife. "We have to figure out a way to pay this guy back for his generosity. What can we do?" So they hatch a plan. They both will go back to the store together and get enough clothes, and between them, they are sure they will exhaust this gift certificate. So they go. They both find things they want and then approach the register as a united front. The owner begins ringing up their purchases and bagging each item one by one. And he gets to the end and turns around and, with a look of amazement, says to the couple, "You guys are not going to believe this. I've tallied up everything, and the total comes to exactly 0. The couple protested, "That cannot be accurate. We've more than exceeded the credit we had left on the gift certificate." And then the owner took a serious tone and said, "I don't think you understand how this gift certificate works. No matter what you throw at it, the total will always come up to 0. Well, that's the way we usually read this parable. The generous employer, some call it, the owner of the vineyard being overwhelmingly generous and others finding fault with it. That's the way we're often taught to understand grace. But I wonder if there's not another dimension to grace, another dimension to the personality of God that we often overlook. You see, in this parable, the grumpy employees are not upset about a limitless gift certificate at a fine store. All the employees have received 1 denarius. That's the normal day's wage for laborers in Jesus' time. 1 denarius, and that was just enough to survive. Maybe feed and clothe the family, perhaps even buy some hay for the donkey in the garage. That's it, just enough to get by. It still may not seem just that some work only for an hour for this subsistence pay and others all day. But when we take the riches out of the equation, I think it puts the focus back on the generous employer whose concern is to give his employees what they need to survive. This is not a new concept in the Bible. In our reading from the Exodus, we get a good taste of this. Exodus says, "The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them," and I love this, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." It's rather dramatic, I think. Maybe melodramatic in this case. But they would choose slavery and death for abundance. They would choose slavery and death for abundance over freedom and subsistence. So God does something rather amazing, and amazing on 2 fronts. On the one hand, God rains down on the Israelites quail in the evening and manna in the mornings. That's pretty extravagant. However, there's another side to it. The Israelites can only gather enough to provide for the needs of that day. Now, you remember from Sunday school what happens if they get more. Anything they gather in addition to their need is quickly infested with worms. They're allowed to get a little more on Fridays so that they can keep Sabbath, but other than that, they are to get only what they need for the day. Abundance tempered with modesty. I wonder if that isn't a neglected side of God. Have you ever heard anyone talk about the modesty of God? We do pray for it each Sunday. Give us today our daily bread, but we rarely talk about it. There was a pastor once who did talk about it. It took him a while to get there, but he learned the modesty of God. In one letter he writes to his congregation, we heard part of it this morning. We learn in that letter that he's sitting in jail. The congregation, rightly worried about their pastor, has sent him a deacon to check on him and to help him while he's in jail. However, the poor deacon gets sick on the way, deathly sick, and ends up being more of a burden to the pastor than any help. So the pastor sends the deacon back to the church with a letter, and he says to them, I have enough troubles of my own now. I don't need a sick deacon around here, so I'm sending him back. I thank him anyway because he tried. And he goes on to tell his little congregation in the letter, I know you're worried sick about me. Even I don't know what lies ahead. It looks like this may be a long jail term. It may even end in my execution. But I want you to know I have what I need. My needs are met. Because if I live to Christ. And if I die, it will be gain. Can you imagine the kind of faith it takes to be that resigned to the grace and the will of God? And it's not overwhelming grace. Overwhelming grace would have had an earthquake come and shake the walls of the jail down and free this pastor. No, this pastor has learned the modesty of God. He had had some ailment in the past, something in his body or perhaps in his psyche that he considered a stumbling block to his faith and work. And he asked God repeatedly for this thing to be removed. Do you know what God said to him? Not, go, your faith has made you well. That's what we want to hear, right? God's reply was, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. Now the pastor was very generous in his response. He didn't grumble. I think I would have. But the pastor said, so I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore I am content with weakness. I am content with insults and hardships, persecutions and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. Do you know that that level of faith takes a lifetime to achieve? It takes trusting God that what is provided is sufficient. It takes being vulnerable to God and each other. It takes honesty about our needs and even our doubts. I don't know what lies ahead. I know that whenever I turn on the television, it seems that there's yet another natural disaster, hurricanes, earthquakes. The news reports nearly every day that someone in our community has been shot. Every day, it seems, the rhetoric from Washington and Pyongyang ramp up, and war, maybe even nuclear war, seems inevitable. I don't know what lies ahead, but I hope through it that we learn that God's grace is sufficient. Amen.